Hello and welcome to Stories Across Borders. Here we discuss stories told across a range of different mediums: books, TV, games, comics, pretty much all of it. If it's fiction, chances are we'll touch on it at some point. Our one rule, though, is that we can only talk about things in terms of the writing. Anything to do with acting, art, animation, music, any of that stuff is not allowed unless it directly relates to the way the story is being told. I am Daniel Radford, author, looper, and also your host. And once again, I am joined by John Kernan, my frequent partner in crime for these episodes, as we continue our cycle on time travel.
Don't worry. If you feel like you've been here before, you're not caught in a loop. We're doing a classic again.
That's true. We have alluded to some of this stuff in the past, I think, in previous episodes. In fact, I know that because last episode we did promise that this was on the way. We have a special 2-for-1 deal for all the weebs out there, as we'll be discussing Higurashi When They Cry and also ReZero's Starting Life in Another World. Yes, the title really is that long. Uh,
You gotta love light novels.
Indeed. A pair of anime series, although neither of them actually started in that format. Higurashi started off as an indie visual novel, and as mentioned, ReZero started its life, as a light novel series. However, whilst their origins may differ, the franchises have a lot in common. So much so, in fact, that we decided we may as well discuss them together to prevent just ironically repeating the same stuff across multiple episodes.
Yeah, we each experienced one of them for the first time simultaneously, not just in a way to link them together in the brain, but we're also just constantly filled with moments of talk about fact from one, talk about fact from the other. Wait, huh? I deja vu. There's a lot of thematic, and literary overlap
Yeah,
over
the
here.
same
What's
picture.
going on? Yeah.
Uh, Not entirely fair. Like, funnily enough, the shows themselves are actually very different in a lot of ways, but the themes explored
Yes.
and things like that are very much the same in a lot of places. Fair warning, there will almost certainly be major spoilers going forward, and mystery is an element of varying degrees to both series. So if you want to enjoy them unspoiled, go watch them first. They're very good. But then come
Yes,
back.
please. If you haven't seen them already, watch them because these series aren't just hard to talk about spoiler free. They're both almost impossible to talk about spoiler free because you get yourself you get yourself maybe like a single episode's worth of content you could talk about that's not very spoilery, and then everything after that you say anything, you've ruined some tiny small part of some mystery somewhere. So let's be warned.
Yeah, that pretty much nails it. So, for anyone curious how these shows tie into time travel, first and foremost, both of them revolve around some slightly different varieties of time looping. We'll get into the specifics though in a second because I was thinking we could maybe like do a brief summary
Yeah.
of like what each one of these is and then go over them either individually or together. Whatever happens, we'll find out. We can look into the common threads. So, which one do you want to start with?
I think we should go with Higurashi. It's older.
That is fair. It's quite a bit older, even. I think the first iteration of that story came out in 2006.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
Before that, even possibly, because I think the animated version was only like 2007. Anyway, that's probably not important. So, Higurashi is the story of a tiny village in the mountains in Japan called Hinamizawa. Yeah, that's not the easiest word to pronounce for those of us who are not from there, but you get used to it. Specifically, it is the story of that little village in 1983 in June, over and over again.
The Endless Summer of 1983.
How to explain it? Basically, it revolves primarily around a group of these young friends. They vary in age a fair bit because it's a tiny village, so all the students at the school are in one classroom, and this one poor teacher has to manage like kids from the age of like 6 up to like 16. So good luck to them. But
She's dedicated. That
yeah,
school only even exists because she was determined for those kids to have a teacher.
damn right. Uh, but we primarily follow this like eclectic little group who share a sort of game club together, like board games. It's 1983. As we watch in assorted cycles, we watch as in every different time loop, one of them will lose their mind and kill a bunch of the other ones and then inevitably die themselves and the loop restarts again. That
And for most of the
is
story,
that's
we
all
don't
we know.
even have any we don't even have any clue why it's looping. We just notice that every time after everything goes horribly all to crap, then we wake up the next day with a slightly or even massively different story happening around the same time. Again.
Yeah, events typically revolve around like the events that happen where people start losing their minds and becoming violent always happen around this festival to the local deity.
Yep,
And
and the only constants we have are centered around the festival.
exactly. And that deity is important to things, but in fact, it is theorized often that this deity has a curse that punishes people who leave or betray the village, that will cause them to be spirited away or some such.
Yeah. We
Uh,
hear about this curse constantly throughout many of the different loops and always see a weirdly strong mixture of both signs that it could be real and signs that it's made up at the same time.
and honestly, a lot of season 1 of this show doesn't tell you shit about whether that's the case.
It's a very slow drip mystery, which one of the things that makes the series so impressive is slow drip mysteries are generally the ones that are harder to pull off, but they do it.
Specifically, that is because season 1 is based off of what the, I think, visual novel specifically calls the question arcs, which is a really interesting format, right? Where each loop raises questions about the situation, about the world, but it doesn't necessarily answer them. It just gives you pieces and something to think about.
We have to have basically every single question posed to us before we start getting any real answers to any of them.
Yeah, you can start piecing things together if you're paying attention, and that's part of the fun, coming up with your own theories and seeing how things are going to change and putting pieces together. Season 2 is composed of the answer arcs, in which, well, you start finding out what's actually happening, and that is largely because spoilers, big fucking spoilers. This is your last warning.
Massive, horrible spoilers. You got a lot to get through before you get any answers, so now's your chance.
Something we learn early on in season 2 is that the person we thought was our protagonist is not our protagonist.
Yes, delightful go-getter young man, Mr. Keiichi Maebara, is frequently the POV character, even after we realize he's not the main character. He is not the focal point of this story.
Yeah, a lot of it is told through his eyes or his gaze, but that does start to shift away a bit as well in season 2 because we find out that in reality the events of the story are mostly revolving around Rika, one of the younger members of the group, who is like the last one left of this shrine religious family, basically, because the quotation marks curse kind of killed everybody in her family,
Yeah.
actually. Not the only
And
one
of
in the group
course,
who has dealt with that particular fate.
and of course, that being such a big mystery, it is very hard to properly figure that out before getting there, but we do get some strong hints along the way. One of the big ones of which being that, remember I mentioned there are only a few constants before, and they center around the festival. The two main constants of that are every time the festival happens, two particular people will go missing, and almost immediately afterwards, if not at least shortly afterwards, Rika will die. And every time, even when we're following someone else, when Rika dies, It's time to move on to the next loop.
Every time. That's what starts the loop, yes. Which just adds two more layers to the mystery, because Rika also cannot remember who it is that kills her.
Nope.
She's
She
pretty
doesn't
confident
get
she is
any
being
answers,
killed. She knows that much. She knows she is being killed by somebody, but she does not know who they are or why they are doing it. And we, as the audience, are left to wonder why the fuck her dying starts a new loop.
which is the lovely aspect of why Keiichi is usually our POV character.
Because,
Because if Rika were the POV character, it would spoil the mystery for us that even she herself isn't privy to much faster.
yeah, exactly. It also means because he's a new face to the village as well, it means we get a lot of the world building from the fresh face perspective as well. It was a very smart choice to use him as the
Yeah,
POV for all of season one.
much more of a fitting audience surrogate, being that he's surprised and shocked by a lot of the same things we are.
So, what we learn is that the answer to a lot of the questions is yes.
Yes.
Just yes.
Yeah, yes. Sometimes even questions that conflict with each other.
Which is hilarious. We learn, first and foremost, that Rika is talking to somebody that no one else can see, as we eventually are introduced to another character called Hanyu, who turns out to be this village's deity, more or less.
Hanyu is, at least in some small way, even if the myths aren't 100% accurate, Lord Oyashiro.
Exactly. And it is in Hanyu's name that this supposed curse exists, much to her discomfort. Because
Especially considering some of the things blamed on the curse, she was literally
had done to her.
watching
Yeah.
happen and desperately wishing she could
Oh,
change.
that too. Yeah, Hanyu, for most of the story, is unable to interact physically with the world. She can communicate with Rika and experiences what Rika feels. She can observe the world in any way she wants, but she cannot interact with it. Like, sometimes someone will hear her footsteps or hear her apologizing for the things happening in her name, but she can't touch anyone, she can't intervene. And that really sucks when you're witnessing all these horrors and remembering all of them and repeating the loops. Unfortunately, Hanyu also is unable to tell Rika who is killing her all the time.
Hanyu, despite her position of reverence within the village and deific significance to the village and the plot, is also nearly powerless.
Yep. The one thing that her involvement with Rika allows for is the resetting. Hanyu is
Yep,
responsible for the loops because she is trying to prevent a world where Rika and all Rika's friends die.
which
Unfortunately,
is
her constant presence overlooking everything is also one of the things contributing to people's paranoia.
yes, and also unfortunately is um in some ways Rika's looping is the real Lord Oyashiro's curse because Hanyu's the one who did it, and although it allows Rika to continue fighting to change fate, it also forces her to suffer her fate exponentially more than any person reasonably could or should.
Yeah, because the wild thing is, it does seem like Hanyu can't really turn the loops off necessarily. There is a limit to them. The loops are getting shorter more as they go on, for example, giving Rika and Hanyu less time to figure things out, and it does seem like eventually they're going to run out. That's very heavily implied. However, at least for the first several loops before we even like start seeing anything happen, uh, Rika's not starting from like the day before she dies. She has to live her entire life up to being like 11 over and over again.
Yep, the only thing that's set in stone is what time she restarts at.
Yeah.
She can try to make it as far as she wants, but what's supposed to happen is gonna happen unless she makes a miracle happen.
And that's the suffering of of the loop for you. That's a big part of what we're going to get into, and that is a big part of the story. Is we learn that what the story is in season 2. We learn what the story is actually about. It is about this looping scenario Hanyu has created in response to Rika's continuous murder.
And
And
Rika's way of trying to deal with it and finally, finally making some progress after what is essentially a
hundreds of years.
100 years
It's about 100,
worth
right?
of loops.
100 or so, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's about 100 around the first time. Yeah, she's been doing this and failing for enough loops to have been alive 100 years, which, considering some of the loops are only a couple days long, is probably thousands and thousands of attempts.
Yeah, it's not good for the psyche, especially because in every loop she is still just as powerless as she was before, because she doesn't have any more knowledge than she really had the first time. She has a little bit more, but she doesn't know who killed her. She still can't
Yep.
stop her friends going insane. Yeah, remember that? We haven't gotten to the thing where her friends repeatedly go insane and start killing each other. We'll get to that. And she's still in the body of a child, regardless of how her mind has aged. She still
Yeah.
has no power. She has no freedom really, no authority.
She gets to deal with all the downsides of that, the powerlessness, the frustration, the inability or the dysphoria of her body not matching her mind, and slightly attended to that, the fact that, for instance, as a result, the only man she's ever had feelings for in her life is a grown-ass adult with a family who she could never possibly have.
Yeah, it sucks to be her. Going through loops in which you repeatedly see your friends and family die over and over and over again, and then you die and not know why over and over and over again. It's not great, and therein lies a lot of the mysteries. You see, the reason that Rika keeps getting killed is actually tied to why her friends keep going insane and killing each other. Because there's like a virus or microorganism or something that lives around Hinamizawa.
Yeah, some sort of hive mind esque parasite. There's a single queen somewhere in it, and everything else is connected to it, which helps proliferate the idea of it being Lord Oyashiro's curse because they are connected to each other. But basically, everybody who spends enough time in the village, the entire village, everyone who lives there, has
I
these
think to an extent
parasites.
the surrounding area as well, but not nearly as much. But yeah,
Yeah, some people definitely have it, but I think most of the people who live in like the next town over, I'm forgetting what it's called, don't have them. Like Detective Oishi, for instance, he doesn't have it.
yeah, it's only the people
Um,
who spend a lot of time in and around like Hinamizawa.
yeah, and the problem with these parasites is they they foster stress and paranoia only a little bit on their own, but they also react to stress and paranoia, feed on it, and get more active as it gets
They
worse. And
also
by the time,
really
oh,
hate
go
being
ahead.
away from. Sorry, they also really hate being away from the Queen. Is an important thing to note.
That's one answer we get as soon as they tell us, like clearly and definitively, is the reason people think part of Lord Yashiro's curse is that you can't leave Hinamizawa, is because that's one of the few parts where they're almost 100% right, other than the cause. If the parasites get far away from the queen, they start getting sick and uncomfortable and going crazy inside the host.
Which in turn makes the host go crazy in their world, in reality, in the tangible human existence.
Yes. And then the parasites themselves also react in a similar way when the host's stress and paranoia reach enough of a fever pitch. They essentially activate, and at that point, they agitate the host more and more and make it worse and worse until inevitably the host will, whether through insanity or desperation to make the pain and discomfort stop, lose their shit and end up killing others and probably themselves.
Yeah, it's the paranoia especially is what does it. Is that they get this? It starts as a minor thing, and it just exponentially spirals out of control to the point that they're like scratching at their own skin to get the worms out because they feel their skin crawling. They feel like everyone's trying to get them, and in response, end up killing people because they end up in the mindset of I have to get everyone before they get me. It's horrible to watch in the best way. It's a fantastic show and I love it, but it's horrible to watch.
Yeah, and funny enough, despite how long we have to wait for answers for everything else, the clearest depiction we get of the effects and progression of the parasite is actually the very first loop following Keiichi, where he's the one who falls victim to it.
yeah, and the thing is, the show isn't kind to the audience about how they do this because they make you care about these characters. They show a lot of just ordinary slice of life between the madness.
Yeah, we get a lot of time of the characters just being characters in this little village, and those parts are great, and the characters are great. We like them. We like Keiichi and his friends, and then we watch them
And then
kill
they
each
kill
other.
each other. it's it's such a brilliant way like to hammer that home, and I can't stress this enough to all of my fellow writers out there who want to tell really gritty, grim, dark horror or fantasy or whatever stories where everything is shit. You always need something good because it makes the bad things hurt more.
Contrast is important.
We
How's
touch this a
anybody
lot
supposed to
in our
care about the bad
very first
if it's all
Higurashi.
bad?
How's that for
You
looping
gotta
back?
make people. Oh, you're right. We are looping back. Yeah.
Uh,
That always ends up being one of the most important aspects of it. If you want something to be heavy, you want it to be dark, and you want it to hurt, you have to make someone feel good first.
yep. And Higurashi is fantastic at that. Yeah.
Higurashi, when they cry, more like when I cry.
Yeah. Anyway, the shockingly enough, I'm sure at this point, the queen parasite, of course, resides in Rika's bloodline. It is always a woman in her, well, a person of the female variety. Calling Rika a woman is not technically correct. Uh,
Yes.
it is always a female of that bloodline who possesses the queen, which you may note makes killing Rika a very bad idea because it will make all the other people in the village lose their minds.
Also, one of the reasons that without everything being solved, even without the loop, poor Rika couldn't really lose the village because then everyone else would have the same thing happen to her that happens to them if they leave
Yeah,
all together at the same time.
yeah, she can
It
never
would be
lose.
madness. And of course, Rika not being able to leave the village also comes back later to be
Oh
a
yeah.
big deal in another way.
Uh, so basically, season one and two's plot turns out that what is happening is someone discovered the Hinamizawa parasite. No one believed him, and he died in shame and disgrace. And his adopted daughter, who didn't have a very stable upbringing up to that point, went, fuck this, I'm gonna prove him right, no matter what it takes. And realized that if I kill this child, I will prove the existence of this parasite and validate my father's work. Unfortunately, to do so, she also has to spend so long in the village that she also loses her mind because she gets affected by the parasite. But basically, this woman kills Rika and sets this all off to prove a point, and that's where the loops reset because Hanyu, the actual deity who is not responsible for the curse, it's the parasite, is starting the loop to protect Rika. That's the story of Higurashi Part One. You want to get into the like season 3, 4, or the sequel, depending how you look at it, or do you want to?
We could, but I don't know. But we've been going on for a while already, and I don't know if we want to use half of the runtime on just the summary.
Yeah, we've been doing what, like 20 minutes nearly.
Yeah.
Oh no, I scratched that. Nearly 30. Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we
So
can suffice to say there is also effectively a season 3-4 slash sequel. But we'll maybe come back to that on a different episode because
not
uh,
only is there a lot more to say, but no matter how you look at it, those other things are genuinely like sequels and extensions of the story, not quite necessarily strict extensions of the same core story. Season one with the questions, season two with the answers is the core
yeah,
story of Higurashi, and we've outlined that for you.
yeah. In that case, why don't we move on to ReZero as a summary, and then
Ah,
we can start talking about all the common themes and why these stories are both so good.
ReZero, my special precious story that I avoided for so long, thinking it was shallow trash, because despite how good it is, for a long time, it seemed like people only, even people who liked it, only talked about it as if it was shallow trash, because all anybody ever wanted to talk about was the blue and pink haired maids and how cute they are and how cute the elf girl is. And oh my god, look at all the cute girls in this story being cute, and some of them like this guy. What a guy.
Yeah,
And that's not
that's
what it is at all.
yeah, that's. I mean, it's that a little bit, but not in that way, and it's just not fair to reduce it to that.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
weird. I've never seen a good story have so much of its discussion be reductive, even from its own fans.
yeah, it's very strange. It's funny, like I feel like not enough people are talking about have talked about Higurashi. I feel like it's almost the opposite problem with ReZero, where everyone's talking about it in, well, at least as far as weeb community goes.
Yeah,
Everyone has seen it or knows about it or knows the memes or whatever. But
and yet so many people have so little to say.
yeah, because I mean, it was I had it was the same things that kept me away from it until you bullied me into watching it. That's not true. It was more like I'll watch your thing about the loops if you watch mine.
Yep,
Best
exactly.
decision of our lives.
Yep,
But
wonderful decision.
yeah,
So ReZero can be like kind of hard to start the description with because it, similarly to Higurashi, very suddenly goes from feeling like it's one story to beating you over the head with the realization that it's another story.
I feel like
But
that definitely happens much quicker in a way in ReZero. Not entirely because the very first scene of Higurashi is a butchering, but uh,
yeah, no, like
it's about the
it,
same, I suppose,
it's
in that
it,
notion. Just
it
different ways.
it very suddenly and really hits you over the head with the idea because first, is it the first episode or the first two episodes? I think it might be two. Yeah, we get two episodes. Oh, look, it's an isekai story. Oh, this
Yeah, tell me if you've heard this one before.
random nerd walking down the street, and oh wow, it's getting dark, and oh look, he's in another world. He heard a mysterious message that sounds like it could have come from God or something about saving someone, and now here he is in this amazing, beautiful fantasy world. All sorts of different races and kinds of people walking all over the place on the street.
Time for the
Carriages
power
pulled by
fantasy.
little dragon lizards. He's so ready. He's seen this before. He knows how this story goes.
No, he doesn't.
Except he has no powers. He can't read. Nobody has even the slightest bit of concern for what's going on for him. He's getting mugged. No tools, no powers, no abilities.
Yeah, I would
Getting
say
beat up. Sorry.
it doesn't even take the entirety of the first episode to pull that switch on you. It's were you expecting a typical trash power fantasy where a nobody gets taken to the fantasy world and finds that they are the chosen one over there? No, he dies in like the first episode to a random mugging.
No, he doesn't die from the mugging the first time.
Oh
He
no,
just
no, not the first one. He doesn't die to the
he
mugging the first
he
time. You're
gets
right,
he get
but he does get mugged.
he gets mugged, gets the crap beaten out of him, and like thinks, literally sees a girl running by and goes, "Oh my gosh, is this the beautiful girl who must have summoned me
And
to
she
this
like
world?
jumps on his
I'm sure
hair.
she's I'm sure now she is the moment I get she's gone.
Now,
She she's gone. Uh, help. Now, being the lucky guy that he is, Subaru does still get some help, and it is from a mysterious, beautiful lady. But it's a mysterious, beautiful lady who has no interest in him, and when he starts walking around with her to try to quote unquote help her with what
it
she's
actually
doing,
makes her life much harder.
he's actually dragging her around and slowing her down the whole time, and essentially forcing her to be a like nanny type, holding a child's hand and walking through the streets looking for his mother, practically. Which, funny enough, they do find a child and help find her mother, but
Yeah, it's very much an expectation subversion, and that should be the fan base's first hint that this is not going to be what they think it is. But no, they still reduce it to the maids and the elf, who are great
yeah, no,
characters. But that's the thing, they're great characters, but people just, for some reason, all they give a shit about is sexualizing them, and it's very weird. But yeah,
I don't get it.
uh, obviously he does eventually die. The first time, I believe, is whilst he's basically in this shady pub, having found the original girl who disappeared on him as part of a favor to the one who saved him. Yeah, he dies in there and sort of restarts his loop from pretty much not long after he arrived in the world, because that's how his loops function. Is that he basically gets different save points eventually, and will start looping back to that save point if he dies, like playing
Yep,
the game. Haha.
it's not made clear for a while, but essentially when Subaru they still don't make it clear exactly what causes checkpoints, but we can kind of narrow it down to when he makes progress in growing as a person and does the right thing and moves forward in a way that he is happy with and like is also good for the people around him who he cares about, then he makes solid progress and saves a new checkpoint.
Yeah, it's it's very interesting because despite having a lot of the same experiences, that is Subaru, the lead character of ReZero, despite having a lot of the same experiences as Rika from Higurashi, he has very different lessons to learn. For one thing, I suppose
Yes.
he has been spending he hasn't been spending as much time in the loops. He's not gone through as many, so that's part of it. But whilst her big lesson is learning to trust and hope again, uh, his Subaru has to basically learn self worth,
Yeah. And
and that's not
not
immediately
just
clear.
not just in the small way. Like that like we're not talking about self-confidence here. Subaru has to piece by piece get learn
Yeah,
everything that comes with a complete self-worth. Not the basic idea of self-worth. The idea of self-worth you think of when you think of a completed person. And he has to get every aspect of that bit by bit. It's not just a matter of getting confidence or
I mean,
starting
and
to
that's the thing.
value
He has
yourself.
confidence. He almost exudes and is overconfident. It seems is the thing with Subaru, right? Because he's very exuberant. He's very out there. He's always willing to jump headfirst into a situation. He always gives everything like his absolute best. At a glance, you wouldn't assume he has these problems. It only becomes evident over time that all of the that he's a hollow person and that all this external confidence isn't stemming from self-belief, but if anything, the opposite, because he is desperately trying to be a person that he is not, and all of that exterior shell just has to get ripped away through this looping process as he goes through this absolute hell. And we've gone over just earlier in the Higurashi talk what kind of suffering that entails. He has the same situation where he sees people he loves get hurt and die, and then dies himself and reloops and sees it again and has to fix it over and over.
Yeah,
It's not
and
a fun experience. It is traumatizing, but and it but it tears him down and brings him back to ground zero, and then he gets to experience working his way back up to true self-belief.
yeah, the real reason for the title, overly long and specific as it is, isn't that Subaru is starting life over from zero by being transported into a new world. It's that he has to genuinely start from zero. All his preconceived notions and self-worth issues and ideas of what the world is supposed to be that are so simultaneously naive and nihilistic at the same time have to be broken down so that he can really start to live life, because up until now, even before he came to this world, he hasn't really been living. He stopped living a while ago.
Yeah, he's got to learn to live and love again. He's got to learn to love himself, most importantly. And beyond that, even, he has to learn to accept himself, both for his strengths and his weaknesses. Because, in a very sick way from the beginning, even if we don't necessarily see it for a while, the reality is that he builds. He projects strengths he doesn't have because of the weaknesses he knows he does, and as a result of that, neglects the strengths he does have.
Yeah, he's reached a weird point where that mask is almost the only way he can function through a combination of childhood mistakes, misunderstandings, and trying to live up to what he thinks he's supposed to be because of who other people important to him in his life were and are.
And he continues doing that. Like, it's not, he continues doing that for a while into it through the first season of ReZero until it becomes a problem because he's pushing himself too much and trying to be this like white knight shining savior, to the point that it is harming him more than it is helping those around him.
Yeah, and much like the mask he had before, he's not doing it because that's who he is or even necessarily who he wants to be. He's doing it because between a combination of his preconceived notions about what stories like this are and his older issues, he thinks it's what he's supposed to be.
Which is a recurring theme, by the way, in ReZero. Almost every significant character has this as their core arc, is learning to accept who they are instead of being who they think they should be.
Yep.
Heroes, villains, random
Everybody has
people,
issues
all of
and
them.
problems thinking that they're supposed to be a certain way. It's almost like the idea of fighting against fate. It's not always fate, but many of the characters have issues where like it's almost a compulsion. They they don't just think what they're trying to be is what they should be. They think it's what they have to be.
Yeah, often the core message of ReZero is very much you've got to use what you've learned from the past, but don't let it define you.
Yeah. A
Be the you in the
a
present with the information at your disposal, and the lessons you've learned from the past, but that's not who you are now. And you can be who you want to be and who you choose to be and who you really are, not who you think you have to be. It's a wonderful philosophy and a fantastic message to explore, and a show that's always reduced to the waifus.
and an
And I
idea
hate that
that
I just said that word out loud.
and an idea that both fortunately and unfortunately is an extra long road for Subaru to get to, because he is not only going through it multiple times, but is extra primed to try being defined by his past because
because it's
he has the
effective.
loops,
It's the only thing he's
and
got.
the only thing he has going for him is using his knowledge of the previous loops and the things he's already been through to move forward. But that simultaneously carries the risk of locking him in constantly looking backwards and not forwards.
Yeah, hilariously, the like this looping thing is for him is very interesting, especially because of when the loops trigger these moments of like epiphany and personal growth. Basically, it's interesting because as powerless as he is for most of the series, at least most of the series so far, I guess, that is the only tool he has to be victorious in many ways. However, it is also specifically engineered to push him to grow as a person to the point where he doesn't need to depend on it and cling to the past like he does.
Yeah. The only way he can move past being stuck where he is to be ready to let go of what he feels is the only tool he has and the only thing that makes him feel special. Painful as it is, both to let go of, but also to experience it, because that return by death, as he decides to name it, causes him a lot of suffering.
And it doesn't always work out as the thing as well. Like
Yeah, some loops he
he
learns
yeah,
wrong lesson or nothing at all.
and sometimes he learns that starting again and clinging to that past and the ability to loop isn't gonna work. Sometimes you just lose, and you have to learn to move on.
Yep,
It's fucking
and
brutal.
it horribly beats it into him because he Subaru has a hard time moving on. Something we only get really put into context in season 2 is at least some of the loops after Subaru ends up dying, you could argue in a way that his death was him giving up and running away to the next loop where, oh, things will be better this time. I will be doing better without having any clue of what he's leaving everyone else behind to suffer through, or even if that world could, for all we know, continue to go on after his death, and he still could have made things better if he had just done his best and kept going at where he already was.
And again, the thematics really shine through, like in the way things play out, because it's not until he starts learning this lesson for real that he starts learning how to stand on his own 2 feet in this like fantastical world and starts getting tools of his own under his own control that allow him to fight back basically and start.
Yeah.
He spends almost the entirety of the show so far. It is still an ongoing show at this point. The books are a bit further and I don't think they finished it either. Being completely powerless. He gets some tools that he's not really equipped to use yet early on. It's not until near the end of season 2 that he finally is able to stand his ground and take care of himself without having to depend on Return by Death. And the
Yeah,
only way
and
he gets
one
to
of the
that
ways they
point
show
is
that
by
off that I
learning the
love
lesson to
too.
let go of the past. It's so good.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways they do a great job of showing and not telling in that aspect too is once we start getting to the points of the story where Subaru is properly learning his lesson and growing and moving forward. For one thing, we start having way less loops and they start being longer because it's only genuine it starts becoming only genuine failures and stuff he couldn't have foreseen that is leading Subaru to fail and or die. It stops becoming about him not being enough or making these horrible mistakes and starts being about him genuinely butting his head against a challenge that nobody was prepared for, let alone him, which allows him to start becoming a little bit of the hero he thought he was supposed to be because he's not dragging himself and everyone down anymore. And he's genuinely not just doing his best, but doing things only he can do to help everybody, not just himself, move forward into a better world.
Yeah, and I mean we see that as well because we see him gradually transition, right, to a point where toward the end of season 2, he is now teaching the lesson of letting go of what is weighing you down and embracing who you are to other important characters. It's not like he's become the master, you know. He's
No.
he's still not quite there himself yet, but he's got enough of that down himself now. He understands that enough himself by the end of season 2 that he can teach that lesson to other characters, and it's imparting that lesson to them that allows them to come out on top in the end.
And symbiotically growing with his friends instead of just growing past them and pulling them along. And I mean, heck, he gets some extra lessons the same way himself from some of his other friends. My boy Otto is the one who puts all that into context for him and like helps him come to that realization that he can be that by being that for him first. And they do such a good job trying to make Otto seem like an interesting but ultimately unimportant character and half of a plot device before that. And then suddenly they're like, no, by the way, this guy's real.
Yeah, he has a history and he matters and he's great. And if you thought
I love
otherwise,
Otto.
fuck you. um, yeah, Otto is fantastic, and like again, it's very different contextually, but it is actually another example of having to learn to lean on other people and let them support you, because whilst for Rika it's learn to have hope and again and to trust again after these loops of seeing everyone kill each other and all that. For Subaru, it's learned that it's okay to not be enough. But that's enough on the summaries. Interestingly enough, we've actually managed to not spoil that much of the actual plot of ReZero.
It's a little easier
Yeah,
to
that's
talk
true. Because
about
it's
without
not really
spoiling
like there is
Higurashi.
mysteries, but the story of ReZero isn't about the mystery.
Yeah, the central story of ReZero isn't a mystery. It just
Has mysteries.
involves many well-layered mysteries and pieces of mystery.
By comparison, Higurashi is its
Higurashi
genres are
is a
horror and
mystery.
mystery.
Yeah.
uh, but this is now that we've given you some context that's right guys, that last 51 minutes roughly, that was all context. We may go a little over our hour limit on this one.
Yeah. Just a little. But luckily, this has also looped us around to like the first of talking about like big tie-ins to the story is although there are a lot of other differences, Subaru and Rika have to learn some of the same lessons, like the relying on other people thing. They've both been conditioned for at least part of the story to think that they're the only ones who can change things and make it better because they have the special ability and the special knowledge and all that that nobody else does until it's thoroughly beaten into their heads that you can't do everything alone no matter what you have going on. And one thing I love is true to life. Being beaten into your head that doing everything by yourself isn't enough isn't enough to properly learn the lesson. It's only when they have the luck or the miracle or whatever or what have you to start seeing somebody else who wants to make things better for them and who actually can make a difference.
Yeah, which is that's something we didn't really touch on in Higurashi, I guess, is that it is explicitly stated in Higurashi as well, because that show also has an Otto, believe it or not. It's just that we think Otto's the protagonist for the first season.
Yeah, Keiichi is our Otto.
It is explicitly stated by, I think, Rika, maybe Hanyu, I'm not sure which one, that the loops in which Keiichi doesn't move to Hinamizawa are always the worst.
Yeah, he he is he is one of the only like seemingly at least mostly if not purely positive variables in this faded repeating existence.
It's because personality wise, he's a motivator and a leader. Like, he doesn't have much to offer the group in terms of actual skills. He doesn't have the connection or I guess craftiness in the case of
Yeah.
the Sadako or Mion slash Shion have. Oh yeah, there's twins. That's
Yep.
never used against you. Don't worry about it.
But he's
But he's a
he's
leader.
charismatic
He's charismatic and he's a motivator more than anything.
and he is
Positive.
smart, even if it's not quite book smart. And more than anything else, despite not having the looping, he has just about as much determination and willpower as Rika
More so, yeah,
does.
to be honest.
Having lived through these hundreds of years, he still comes in as a fresh face. And as they say, it's Keiichi and his will and determination that make a miracle possible.
Yeah, in both stories, that one person to recontextualize and push is very important. It's not as centralized in ReZero. Like, Otto's the big one, but there are also pushes from Rem and Wilhelm, and like,
Who?
is it? Oh god damn it! Took me a minute. Fuck you. Uh, you'll know when you know, dear audience. uh, it still hurts. Um, but yeah, all this is to pile on to a point that we talked about a little bit in the first episode of this cycle, right? We talked about what the different types of time travel story are good for. And I don't remember the exact words, but what I said was loops are the ones where a time looping story is the story where what you want to explore is a philosophy and also where you want to hurt your characters.
Yeah, because by virtue of being a loop, none of the hard facts or anything like that are going to change on their own. The only thing that has room to change is your characters, especially the looper.
I couldn't have put it better. Yeah, it's exactly that. Because again, something we touched on is that a loop story is always in some way about escape.
You're
Whether
either escaping to it or trying to escape from it.
yeah, either you're trying to exist in this never-ending loop to escape reality, or you are desperate to escape the loop and get to reality.
Yep,
And
and
this is where the
the
two differ a
funny
bit
enough,
because it's not entirely obvious at first, but ReZero is very much escaping into the loop, whilst Higurashi is very much all about escaping out of it, which is one of the places they differ. But that's okay because it's still interesting.
and in that interesting way, they both come back to acceptance because Subaru isn't necessarily supposed to be escaping from reality. It's despite the fact that he is supposed to stay here and he's not supposed to be trying to leave this world, he's also not supposed to be using it to escape reality at the same time. That's what it is to him at first, and even for a while after he starts learning other lessons, it still is an escape from his real life, but he's eventually forced to confront that and accept the fact that there is no escape from reality. He's just in a different reality now than he used to be. And much like he always should have with his old life, he has to accept how things are and accept who he is to move forward and make things better. Much like how, despite being stuck in a loop, not just literally, but also in her own psyche by that point, Rika has to accept how things are and accept the things around her to change them.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's easy to miss, I think, with Higurashi, especially this idea of acceptance, right? Because the whole thing is about fighting the will to fight back against her circumstances. But accepting your circumstances doesn't necessarily mean you're submitting to them.
Yes.
Rika has to accept what is going on, but not give in to the despair that comes with it. Because, like, psychologically speaking, and God knows my psychologist has told me this plenty, acceptance does not mean embracing that everything is going to be shit. It means saying, okay, this is how things are. What can I do about it?
Yeah. You have to, it's, how can you change something if you can't accept it? How can you affect it if you treat it as if it's not real and you don't acknowledge it? You can't you can't change what's not real, what's not true. So if you want to change it, you have to accept it.
And resigning yourself to it isn't accepting it.
No, resigning
Because
resigning yourself is in its own way just another form of denial.
yeah, realistically speaking, by the time we as an audience come into the story of Higurashi, Rika is no longer trying to change things. She is
Yeah.
hoping against the like faintly, dimly hoping that something will be different in a loop. But she is not actively doing something.
By that point, she is resigned, and that's part of why we're able to keep the mystery of her being so important so well at first, is because she's acting so much like just a regular kid. And at that point, it's it's not a mask. That's a version of Rika who has given up and is just living through the loops, hoping something will change while she does nothing despite knowing where she's heading.
Yeah, at that point she is just trying to enjoy the positive parts where she can, even though it is getting harder and harder because she knows what's going to happen. And yeah, I just lost my train of thought.
Oh yeah, I mean that's
That's
she's
just
convinced
yeah.
herself that she's convinced herself that she can't change anything and that she's at the whims of fate, and if she wants things to finally get better, she has to be in just the right loop where just the right combination of things happen that things can get better. And until then, all she's doing is living her life and trying to ignore her inevitable terrible fate
Yeah,
for the sake of holding her sanity together and just living like a normal kid for what small amount of time she can before things inevitably go to shit.
yeah. I mean, she's got to learn that she has agency. She has to accept that she has agency and a part to play. And she has to realize that these are the circumstances she's got. They're not going to get better. She has to make the situation work. And yeah,
Yeah,
sometimes some loops are going to be more or less favorable. The ones without Keiichi are a wash. The ones where Akasaka shows up, definitely better.
yeah.
That
But
man
like,
is a
you know,
badass. And also just nice.
yeah, just she has to learn two sides of the same lesson. She has to be willing to accept health and help and acknowledge that people besides her can make a difference and change things and can even work with her to do that. But she also has to accept that she's a piece with value on this board, and no matter what else is going on and how hard other people are fighting or trying, nothing is going to change and get better unless she gives it her all too.
And
She is a piece, and like he said, she has agency, and she has to make things happen.
I mean, if that's not what a loop story is about, I don't know what is. Because more, even more than a being escape, loops are stories of stasis, where a character has to learn a lesson before things start changing. It's the same thing with Subaru. He has to learn that self acceptance and self worth before he can start actively making things change himself, and he can stop depending on those loops. He has to learn that lesson to move past the loops, and that's why we start seeing, as you said, the loops happen less. With
Yep.
Rika, it's that other jumble of lessons we just talked about.
Yeah, and like one thing we always come back to in these looping stories is regardless of what villainous force or who's the agent of getting stuck in the loop or all those other things, for the most part, the ultimate antagonist of every loop is always stagnancy, and the ultimate goal is moving forward. whether that's moving forward as a person, moving forward literally like personal growth, whatever. It's some form of you have to make progress. Nothing is going to change, nothing is going to get better unless you take those steps forward yourself, looking towards that better future that you want. And you can't fumble mindlessly through it. You can't ignore it, and you can't just walk forward without thinking about it either, because you can't walk forward if you're always looking back.
Yeah, even if you're the villain and you're the one, say, causing the loop or whatever to make it happen over and over to, relive it and try and get exactly the situation you want, you're still inevitably going to have to learn that lesson and move toward that point of progression, whether you like it
Yeah,
or not.
that's something Higurashi does really well. Like, not to go back into like extra spoiler territory, but that person we mentioned, who's the one for the most part who always inevitably kills Rika, has to learn the same lessons before things can get better and move forward.
Yeah, she's got to learn to accept the life she has had up to a certain point and stop being so caught in the past. And she's also, unfortunately, I would suggest, has learned the lesson of agency maybe a little too much because she's come to the conclusion that I can very much make what I want happen. I'm basically a god. She doesn't even have the knowledge of the looping. She's just nuts. In the villain of the first two seasons anyway, since we have a little bit of extra time, briefly touch on seasons 2 and 3 of Higurashi, just to clarify something that I think is very interesting.
Oh yes.
Uh, because it does something very interesting that I can't think I've seen a lot of stories, if any, do, in that it recognizes there is a flaw in its own philosophy from its original 2 seasons. To clarify, by the way, seasons 2 and 3 we're talking about, there's actually a lot of like random, mostly non-canon filler stuff that happens between those over the years. Then in I think 2021, the actual season 3 comes out. That's why we often talk about it more like a sequel than a season 3. Anyway, yeah, something interesting it does is that it also, as from a meta point, learns from the past, and that it needs to make some progress because it realizes that there is an unhealthy flaw in this narrative of you can always trust your friends, you should always depend on each other, you should stay together forever. It sort of looks at that and goes, "Oh, uh-oh."
What happens when that what
That's
happens when that idea is lasts forever, really does last forever, and is taken to its extreme?
yeah. They sort of realize that stagnancy thing. Uh,
We've come back to it.
we've come back to it, haven't we? Oh dear. Because they engineer a scenario for seasons 3 and 4 where, I mean, we're already down the spoiler road. We might as well get into it, huh? Rika and the others finally get to grow up. You know, they get the older ones. They get into university and stuff, and have to move away to actually attend their universities of choice. And they still keep in touch with each other. They're still good friends, but they're not together anymore. And that leaves just the two younger ones, Rika and Sadako, who are, only just getting to like middle school and eventually early high school, I think, themselves in the village as the only ones. And, they're joined at the hip because, they're both orphans. They live together. They do everything together. They've gone through all this hell together. They're the best of friends. There's some undertones there that maybe some of them want to be more than that, but the show doesn't really address it, so we won't go into that theory. Uh,
Yeah, because ultimately
that's me personally.
the concrete more solid parts of their relationship are more important.
It doesn't make a difference to the message anyway.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. It's the message stays the same either way, so the story doesn't dwell on it.
Yet you hear that, fan shippers. We hear you. We know the subtext is possibly there. It doesn't matter.
It's not important. They can be as gay or not as they want for each other. Don't care.
But yeah, and Rika has entered this mindset of, oh my god, I'm finally progressing after that 100 odd years. I'm finally living a life. I want to experience it to the fullest. But Sadako, who may only have, in her mind, experienced the loop once at that time, because the others don't retain their memories per loop, only Rika was stuck with that. So she's only experienced it once, but her loop contained a hell of a lot of trauma on its own that has made her extremely terrified of being abandoned. She has massive abandonment issues because, she lost her parents, she lost her brother in another way, and her uncle was an abusive prick. And also, the village kind of hates her for a lot of her life for stupid reasons. It's a whole other thing. So these two friends who live together on their own without much adult supervision at all, these two orphans who have been together their whole lives, who depend entirely on each other, have a diametrically opposing needs and wants. Where Rika is desperate to leave because she can leave Hinamizawa now and experience a life. And Sadako is seeing everything change and everyone moving away, and it's killing her inside.
And she's even feeling like Rika is moving away from her, which is both true and not true. It's an interesting conundrum we fall into where in different ways
Right, like Rika can't leave a lot. She still has to stay close to the village, or everyone will lose their shit. But there is a big fancy school in the next town over, and that's close enough.
No, she's going a little further than that. Remember, they actually start figuring out how to properly make drugs to
No,
deal
you're
with
right.
Hinamizawa
Yeah.
syndrome
No, you're right.
by the end of the
That's what it
story.
is. Yeah, they
Um,
started. They have. You're right. I am
so
mistaken.
she finally can actually leave, but the problem is,
Sadako's too far
despite
gone. She's got the last
well,
exit. She
that
wants
and
to go
also
fast.
despite her intentions, the only thing Rika has been wanted and has been pushing towards and had as a goal for essentially 100 years is leaving this village and moving on with her life, to the point where, unfortunately, once she actually achieves that goal, by that point, it's an obsession. She's obsessed. She's gone from having to move forward to being obsessed with moving forward, to the point where, even with the best of intentions, Sadako's not entirely wrong. Rika is leaving her behind right in front of her face.
Yeah, and Rika's so obsessed with this, she's not realizing what is happening. That Sadako does not have the same book smarts as she does. She's not stupid. She's very cunning and crafty and like not street smart, I guess, but witty. But she's not bookish. She
And she
is
killed
being
herself to get into that school.
she because of her own desperate fear of losing basically losing the connection to the last friend who's still with her. She grinds herself to the dirt to follow Rika and stay in that awful school with her, despite the fact that even there, Rika is slowly drifting away from her. And that's when she comes into her own looping, because there's other deities out there other than Hanyu, and unlike Hanyu, who is basically I don't want to say crippled. It's not a great word, but it's the one that comes to
A
mind.
piece.
Yeah.
We are left with the unfortunate we're given the unfortunate revelation that there's a reason, besides all the bad luck and bad stuff, that Hanyu was so relatively powerless. It's because we were partially right. Hanyu is Lord Oyashiro, but she's also a piece of Lord Oyashiro, and we come into contact with what is essentially a bigger piece of the whole, and also probably the reason for the negative sides of the mythology surrounding Lord Oyashiro in Hinamizawa.
Yeah, who is evil as shit and is just in it for entertainment. Basically, it gives Sadako the ability to loop, but also the ability to retain enough information that she is aware that she can make the loops happen. Sadako It's given the ability to actively choose to start a loop again by dying effectively.
Yep, and
If
this
that, and
part does
no,
the
to be
same thing
fair,
as the
sometimes
first
it's
part.
not even death. Sometimes she just gets to loop again. So
Yeah,
this power
this
is good
part
for
does the
someone
same thing
who's
to us as the first part too. Like
yeah.
we have a questions arc and an answers arc, and they let us go through the entire questions arc, getting little pieces, but also spending the whole time, other than a few key moments here and there, going, wait, how
Why?
the hell is all
Yeah.
this happening again? And all these little things here and there. And the part that finally pushed it for me and made me go like, wait, there's something even more than I previously thought going on was actually a loop where the person who goes insane is Detective Oishi. And I went, wait, hold on. He doesn't have Hinamizawa syndrome.
He doesn't
He
live.
doesn't have the parasites. What? Wait, he's doing the thing, but he doesn't have the thing.
Yeah, and they spend a lot of time casting suspicion on the same villain from part one. But no, she's learned her lesson more or less,
She's
and
she's dealt with.
yeah,
There's only like one potential loop left where everything is going so bad that she still goes back to doing the same thing. And in every other loop, even the ones where there's no further interference from our main characters, she's not the villain anymore.
yeah, it's very well done, very interesting. We learn only in season two, so season four, that it is Sadako who has been starting all these new loops and stuff, has been given the information and the ability to do it, who is also suffering from late stages of Hinamizawa syndrome because at that point it's not curable, it's just manageable, which drives her
Yeah,
paranoia and her fears about
a
abandonment.
she's essentially gotten a suppressant instead of a vaccine
Yeah.
because the poor thing was already in the late stages of it way before the story ever happened. She was just, I hadn't thought about it before, but do you think that's actually another layer of reasoning as to why she's so attached to Rika and always staying close to her? Because Rika is the queen, and that
Um,
helps her hold on.
I don't think that was the intent because it would undercut a lot of the important like messages and stuff. I think
Well, I guess I just mean more specifically if her closeness to Rika is one of the reasons she survives late stage Hinamizawa syndrome without snapping.
could be, definitely could be.
But
But yeah,
before I get too sidetracked by that, um she's gone there. It's only because of her friends and the little things here and there that she's held on to this point, because the horrible trauma and stuff she went through progressed her Hinamizawa syndrome a long time ago. It had already happened before we start entering the story.
back in like season one, she is only barely keeping it together in most of the loops because
And,
of she's taking suppressants because
that's also why Satoshi is missing.
yeah.
It already happened to him.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's how she lost her brother. It is only so yeah. By the time we get to that scenario where she's in the late stages, it's and Rika in her obsession, ironically, her obsession with escaping the past and leaving and having a full and meaningful life is also an obsession with the past by default. It's still defining
Yeah,
herself by what she's suffered.
because she's obsessed with this. She's obsessed with escaping it instead of letting the past continue to be a part of who she is. She's desperately turning away from it as much as possible, and you can't properly move into the future by denying and ignoring your past any more than you can by continuing to lean on it and
Yeah.
rely on it.
And it's unfortunately like it's understandable. You can't blame her for all the horrible shit that is about to happen to her. But at the same time, it's hard to you can't put all the blame on Sadako because of her own situation because it's Rika and her obsession and the growing distance between them that feeds into Sadako's again disease fueled paranoia, fear of abandonment.
Yeah, because up to that point, Sadako was fighting through it, and like I said earlier, she practically like She tortured herself to get into that school. Everything about being at that school and the level of studying and the kind of book stuff
And
she had to get
abuse, to
into
be honest, let's be
is
honest.
is antithetical to who she is, and she did it anyways just to stay with Rika. And all Rika had to do was continue to, at least in some ways, be the same person, be her best friend, and keep with her. And Rika was too obsessed with change and progress to see that. She thought she could just do exactly what she wanted and bring Sadako along with her like a carry-on luggage friend, which, despite the best of intentions in its own way, was an extremely selfish and cruel thing to do.
Yeah, and that's what triggers it all. Like that's what sets everything off. Like I can't stress enough that Sadako is an abuse victim who
Yeah,
willingly subjects
multiple
herself.
kinds of
Yeah,
abuse at that.
who willingly subjects herself to a borderline abusive environment, if not outright, for the sake of her desperation to try and stay with someone who is actively trying to escape from where they're from. It's
Only for that person to slip away bit by bit,
and she
anyways.
snaps, and that's how all that happens. And what's wonderful about this is that it's still about stagnancy, but it's all and because it's addressing the the flaw in this in the like philosophy of the first one, where it's saying yes, your friends are important and you can depend on them, but you can't be dependent on them. You can't use people as a crutch. You cannot cling to them in an unhealthy, stagnant way. You have to grow as a person yourself, which I think is
Yeah.
wonderful. And it's
And
just,
you have to be willing to accept things like the past too, because both Rika and Sadako are, in different ways, about different things, refusing to accept things. Rika has gone from finally accepting things and making a change to just denying and refusing to accept something else, which in this case is Hinamizawa and the past that she doesn't want to define her future.
yeah, it's. This is why looping stories are so good, and why I can very much understand how they got so popular over in Japan, and to an extent here, like not to the same extent here or over in the US where you are, but we've had Groundhog Day in Palm Springs and stuff, and enough of like the media from over there has reached us at this point to give it some popularity. Like, there's a reason it's so popular is because it touches such a primal thing in a person, this idea of this drive to progress and grow and move forward, that even those of us who are really resistant to change still have as an integral fiber of our being. Uh, Looping stories like even the ones that are mostly a comedy like Groundhog Day, they hit different because
Yeah,
they hit those very specific notes where they are all about learning to accept your past and who you are. They are learning to move beyond stagnancy, and they are the very real, well, not real, but like they are very much a representation of the very real human suffering of living in stagnancy, a life that feels like it's going nowhere.
yeah. Many people,
Although,
hell, not even many people. I would almost say most point at some, or most people at some point or another, literally live in real life through the same feeling that comes from being stuck in a loop in these stories of, oh, I'm living the same day over and over again. Nothing changes.
yeah,
And that, for various reasons, is horrifying
the
to
first
people.
the first time I watched Higurashi, I was in a really good place in my life, and it still resonated with me. I rewatched the whole series a lot more recently whilst dealing with, a chronic illness that I just can't seem to. It's not fun. Let's just leave it at that. And I was like, oh wow, I thought it hit before.
Yeah, no, it's that might be part of why it
And
resonated
ReZero is
with
the
me for the
same.
first time. Like, things are better now, but I used to be, when I was younger, feel stuck in a Groundhog Day situation. I was in a place I didn't want to be, with bad things happening constantly, that it felt like I was powerless to change. And like it's one of the great things is about it being a primal fear is those stories will always resonate because that fear and that feeling is in us even before we actually experience it
It's
ourselves.
just such an
And
important part of
it
being human.
it hits because humanity it's even like one of the racial traits most good stories that have like sci-fi stuff or fantasy stuff give us is we are obsessed with progress and terrified of stagnancy, sometimes to a point of self-destructiveness, but also sometimes to a point of it being the only way to move forward. Because even with that obsession, there are many people who it doesn't really hit them until they experience it. A lot of people who are suffering and who things seem to change for a lot and have no stability reach this point of telling ourselves or themselves like, oh man, if only I could just have this one thing I want that would make everything better, and then everything could just be the same. If only I could just go through the same nice day that I want to have every single day until
It would
you
eventually
have it
become hell.
and realize that's never what you wanted. And if it was for at some point genuinely what you wanted, you realize it doesn't make you happy. It's nice for a little while, but if nothing really does change, you just go back to the same kind of pain you were before, except now it's a trap of your own making, just like somebody who runs away to a time loop.
We as human beings are both blessed and cursed to always want more, always want to progress, always want to keep going to that next step. But it is simultaneously one of the worst and greatest things about us. But speaking of moving forward, this has been a like 30-minute longer than usual episode, just about. There's a lot more we could talk about still. We could get into like the psychology of Oishi and Takano from Higurashi, all the stuff going with the different clans in the village in regards to Sadako and her own like
Yeah.
situation with the uncle. We could
We could
go
talk about
into
each of these individual stories for hours and
yeah.
hours, let alone both of them together.
We could touch on like Amelia's history, Beatrice, Roswell is a huge example of all this from ReZero. Garfield, yes, that's his name. Yes, he is a cat person. Uh,
And yes, ironically, it is Garfield, not Garfield.
yeah,
Howdy.
just got to make it a little bit different. We could get into all that. There's so much more we could say on these themes and just these shows in general because they are all so layered. Probably more we could say on time loops in relation to it all too. But we are also people and therefore must progress. So we will leave it there.
Yep. Sorry, guys. Can't get stuck in a loop on this one. But congratulations. Your double feature has almost become feature length to match.
Just about, yeah. Uh, but yeah, until then, you can find me on what is left of Twitter because I refuse to call it X. Yes, I will live in that loop till the day I die. Screw you, Elon.
Some realities just have to be denied.
Uh, at Daniel Wright 7, you can find this podcast if you are listening to it on my site on Google Podcasts and Spotify. If you're listening to it over there, you can find it on my website, radfordwrites.com, where I also share sort of blog and article posts and other writing and link to my books, which you should absolutely buy. Smooth. And as
They're good books.
always, you will certainly hear more of John, who I drag into these podcasts routinely and also sometimes do other things with.
Yep, and I'm trying to. Oh, that's not ominous at all. I'm trying to not just work on the voice acting stuff, but break more into streaming soon. The setup is progressing and starting to get much better. So once I actually start streaming, I'll be able to plug that for you guys at the end of these episodes.
Hell yeah. progress. Until then, goodbye. Woo.